Prepare your brain, because this gets odder the more you think about it. Although wrestlers are already human beings playing characters, sometimes said characters then go and dress up as other characters. Yep, often done to try and trick an opponent. There's varying rates of success with the tactic. Sometimes it results in a brilliant twist, sometimes it makes you want to turn off the TV because it's that bad. In fact, that kinda sums up most things in wrestling, really. There's such a storied history with it though, it would be unfair to not go through such events and see what on earth went down. I'm Simon from WhatCulture, and please do remember to subscribe, and this is 10 times wrestlers fooled you into thinking they was somebody else. Number 10, The Undertaker as Kane. On the July 6th, 1998 episode of Raw, no one arrived when The Undertaker's theme music hit. This was doubly worrying because 1, where the hell was the dead man, and 2, what was going to happen given that Kane and Mankind were already in the ring waiting to have a match. It was a big deal too, as the winner would become the number 1 contender for Stone Cold Steve Austin's world title. That isn't something you just give up. It was irrelevant as the Phenom didn't show, leaving Vince McMahon with no other choice. He scrapped the triple threat and made it a nice and simple one-on-one contest between the Big Red Machine and Mick Foley. Little did he know. Given they were tag team partners, Mankind was a little reluctant to take on his kind of friend, but that love fest was not reciprocal. As soon as the opportunity arose, Kane smashed his mate with a steel chair and started to lay a beating on him. The bond was broken. It was a vicious assault too, which finished when Kane rolled his foe back in the ring and pinned him, but the real surprise was yet to come. For you see, it was not Kane under the mask this night, but The Undertaker, and he had tricked us all in order to ensure his passage to the main event at SummerSlam. Undertaker seemed to like this, as he did it again a little less than a year later before WrestleMania 15, only this time he used the disguise to get one over Triple H. The lesson is, always make sure you're actually fighting Kane, even when you think you're sure. Undertaker could get bored and just go through it all once more. Number 9, Edge and Christian as Los Conquistadors. Even to this day I remember this fondly, and that's because it was excellent. It also baffled a lot of people when the Conquistadors turned back up in the WWE in the year 2000. Before this, the gold mask wearing idiots had been nothing more than jobbers back in the 80s, so seeing them re-debut in the Attitude Era seemed completely out of place. That was exactly the point. Going after the Hardy Boys, it became quite clear thanks to their moveset that it was Edge and Christian under the hoods who had conducted quite the plan in order to get the jump on their rivals. WWE didn't want to play it quite that straight though, which is why we also got backstage skits where Team ENC was stood next to the Conquistadors. How could it possibly be them if they were all hanging out together? It all went out of control from here because the Conquistadors actually won the tag titles from the Hardys, with the long-term plan being Edge and Christian would then go and put a couple of nobodies under the masks, and then they would beat them, proving that yes, Edge and Christian were actually the tag team champions. Unfortunately, Jeff and Matt were wise to all of this, so when the opportunity came, it was them in the costumes instead. While this was all over the place and saw the belts change hands like nobody's business, you can't deny it wasn't fun, and one of those early 2000 nuggets that has stood the test of time. Should do this more, really. Works. Number 8, Chris Jericho as Sin Cara. Way back in 2016, there was a rumour that Sin Cara had knocked out Chris Jericho backstage over here in the UK. Maybe he heard Fozzie's latest single and just lost it. It's a joke, Chris. Y2J was quick to downplay it all via Twitter, and as it turned out, they basically just had a row on a bus. Given how crazy the tours are through Europe, it was likely tired wrestlers being tired. Either way, there was a lot of interest here, as both guys had been known to have a bit of a short fuse. Sin Cara had apparently gone nuts at Simon Gotch earlier in the year, and this was also around the time Jericho stood up to Brock Lesnar after SummerSlam. He was talking about that again recently and admitted his plan was to bite Brock's nose off. Smart. Because Jericho is quite good at all this, he simply used it and worked it into an angle. As Universal Champion, Kevin Owens took on Seth Rollins for the title on the November 21st episode of Raw. A man in a Sin Cara mask jumped the challenger and cost him the match. Naturally, that person was Chris Jericho. While for most it was just a neat touch to the story, those in the know realised what this was referencing, and it was a firm middle finger to the rumour mill. That's quite the balancing act, but it's a line Jericho always seems keen to walk down. Number 7, DDP as La Parka. DDP was on fire during his career-making feud with Randy Savage. Regardless of who else was on the roster, Page found a way to rise to the top. He was kicking ass. Given the era and nature of the program too, when the Macho Man was booked to face La Parka on a random episode of Nitro, fans knew what to expect. DDP would interfere and probably just punch Savage in the face. This is what Diamond Dallas did, but not in the way you'd think. While the man strutting around in a mask performed just like La Parka, it was actually DDP who had dressed up as him. This was clear when from nowhere the luchador hit a diamond cutter, but it just helped the reveal. The audience were in on the joke straight away, and when DDP removed his mask, they all went nuts. Well, apart from Scott Hall, who was ringside. He was really pissed off. DDP pinned Randy in a great visual before a tag team showdown at Bash at the Beach, and this is a big reminder that WCW did know what they were doing at one stage during its life. Number 6, Ric Flair as the Black Scorpion. Having a mysterious figure turn up in your promotion and then take out your main guy will always work. Curiosity is a powerful tool, so when the Black Scorpion arrived and attacked Sting, everyone wanted to know who this was. The problem was this was also true for WCW. Even though this gimmick had been greenlit, nobody behind the scenes was sure who was actually going to officially play him. It was just going to be someone in a costume, and then they would figure it out. Billed as someone from Sting's past, the Scorpion was voiced by Ole Anderson, and that would have been fine. With their history and the Four Horsemen, it would have made perfect sense, but when Anderson broke his arm only a few weeks in, the plans had to change. The powers that be were desperate for a replacement and picked Al Perez, but he had one big issue: he didn't want to lose to Sting. As you can guess, that was the end of that. This all came to a head at Starrcade 1990 when Sting and Scorpion were going to meet inside a steel cage. Out of ideas, World Championship Wrestling just went back to their usual well and put Ric Flair in there. Wasn't as bad as it could have been, even though it still sucked. It was obvious who it was straight away, and any astute fan probably realised that WCW had been changing the person constantly, but any doubts were thrown out the window when Flair just straight up revealed himself. All in all, this was rubbish. Number 5, Chris Jericho as Doink. If you thought when William Regal faced off with Crash Holly just before WrestleMania 17 that Doink the Clown wouldn't appear, you would have been wrong. Don't worry that it was 2001, someone needed him back. Already booked in for the gimmick Battle Royal at the Show of Shows, Doink decided he didn't want to wait before dusting off some of that ring rust. Therefore, he came out through the crowd during this contest and beat the hell out of Regal. Miles away from the Clown we remembered though, Doink was flying around the ring, which was very bizarre all things considered. The reason for it, however, was that it wasn't Doink and it was Chris Jericho who had gone back to his future tricks. Which doesn't even make sense as a sentence. He wasted no time applying the walls of Jericho in a warning shot as to what William would get at the upcoming pay-per-view. It worked too, because Y2J would win his match against the Brit and retain his IC Championship that Sunday. The real Doink wasn't able to replicate this success in the Battle Royal, mostly because the Iron Sheik took so damn long to get to the ring. Number 4, Austin Aries as Suicide. There was a time when TNA's X Division was flying, and Austin Aries was a huge reason for that. A consistent performer both in and out the ring, he soon became the reason to tune in. He'd found his momentum. One trait that made him so unmissable was his unpredictability and that he wanted to invoke the power to have the X Division champ face the TNA World Heavyweight champ at Destination X. In 2012, Aries had done just that, walking out as the total non-stop action champion. That meant when it came round again in 2013, every X Division wrestler wanted to try and repeat this feat so they could have their moment in the sun. So, when Suicide won the X title on the eve of the pay-per-view, the victory came as a surprise to everyone. Even more of a shock was the revelation made by Hulk Hogan that the man behind the Suicide mask, TJ Perkins, had been attacked and replaced before the match. This all meant that whoever this Suicide wasn't the real Suicide, and that's because it was Austin Aries, who, as mentioned, just wanted to repeat history. It was an awesome swerve and one that helped underline that during this time, Aries could do little wrong. Number 3, Eric Angle as Kurt Angle. As far as this whole idea of impersonations go, they don't come much better than what Kurt Angle did with his brother Eric. Realizing that the task ahead of him, which was defending his world title against The Undertaker, was probably too much, Angle decided he would come up with a plan to ensure he would walk away with the gold. He went and did just that. Waiting for the right moment, the Olympian crawled under the ring, only to seemingly arrive back on the scene and get the last ride. When the ref went to make the pin though, he stopped in his tracks. Why? Because that wasn't Kurt Angle. The real Kurt then popped up from behind and rolled Taker up for the win. This worked so well it was almost ridiculous, and it gave fans what they wanted. Angle didn't lose his title and Taker wasn't hurt in the process. In fact, WWE liked it so much they did it again 3 years later when Kurt defended his WWE belt against Brock Lesnar before WrestleMania 19. It worked even better this time, with few fans even noticing, as Eric took Kurt's place during Brock's entrance. It was twin magic, even though they're not even twins. The idea again was to have Eric take the F5 only for Lesnar to stop the cover when he realised what was going on. It still screwed him up, however, as he got caught by a small package as Angle re-emerged. I tell you, This was really good. Number 2, Dean Malenko as Ciclope. Dean Malenko versus Chris Jericho was a feud highlight in WCW. Propping up the Cruiserweight division for months, they had great match after great match. While not their finest, the best in terms of story was probably at Slamboree 1998 just for the pop alone. Go and watch it now. It all started when Jericho had got rid of Malenko from the company and continued to mark his turf as the heel champion. He had so much faith in his own abilities, he even watched fellow cruiserweights fight it out in a battle royal for the right to face him on the same evening. Whoever won, it would be easy pickings for the champ. Until the winner revealed who he actually was. Coming down to the brilliantly named Ciclope and Juventud Guerrera, there was a strange twist when Juve jumped out of the ring under his own steam. It was because he knew the deal, and that was under the hood was Dean Malenko. When fans realised this, they went nuts. Jericho and Dean would go on to have an entertaining bout, which finished with Malenko winning the title in some good old-fashioned wrestling storytelling. Number 1, Eric Bischoff as the Priest. Eric Bischoff is a man of many talents given that he went from announcer to executive vice president in WCW. He's responsible for a lot of what we see in modern day pro wrestling, but you could argue that his most interesting role came when he arrived in WWE as the GM of Raw. During this run, he smashed a block on JR's head, kissed Stephanie McMahon, and frequently got beat up by Steve Austin, but there is one moment that stands out among them all, and it's still a work of art today. Coming with the climax of the long angle between Billy and Chuck in which they pretended they were going to get married, the skit had everything right down to a priest. That's what it looked like. Using some of the best makeup that WWE has ever seen, it soon transpired that this old man was actually Bischoff. The reaction he received was massive just because fans were so shocked. All of this was very well done in terms of building the tension, and it finished when Eric's Heavy's 3-minute warning rushed the tag team and kicked their ass. Given this all happened on SmackDown and Eric was as red as they come, he had just got another one over his long-running competitor. It was great.